Hello everyone, I am Vanish Signal. And before we start with some new stories, like and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down below from where you are watching this. The church, by the tracks just past the old railroad tracks, hidden behind a tangle of overgrown shrubs and leaning pines, stood the remains of a chapel that time had all but erased. The roof had collapsed in places, leaving jagged beams exposed like ribs. Windows, long since shattered, let in streaks of light that slanted across warped pews and dust-coated hymnals. The steeple had collapsed decades ago during a storm, and moss grew thick on the crumbling stone walls. Locals called it the Church of the Forgotten. Most avoided it. The story went that one Sunday morning in 1971, the pastor delivering the sermon began screaming mid-sentence, his words dissolving into frantic gibberish. He dropped his Bible and walked straight out the front door into the woods, never to be seen again. The church was locked up that night and never reopened. One fall evening, my friend Eric and I decided to see for ourselves. It was one of those dumb teenage dares that felt more serious the closer we got. The air turned colder near the chapel, unnaturally so, and the woods grew quieter. We climbed through a shattered window, landing in ankle-deep leaves and debris. The place smelled like mold, rust, and something faintly sweet, like spoiled wine. Pews were knocked over, the pulpit splintered, but the altar was untouched, polished wood, gleaming in the dying light, and a single white candle placed dead center. That's when we noticed the footprints, bare feet, small, leading directly to the altar from the back of the church. No return prints. Eric dared me to light the candle. I did. The flame surged to life, burning an eerie blue. The air shifted. It wasn't a breeze, it was a presence, heavy and watching. Then, from behind the pulpit, came a dry voice. "You shouldn't have done that." We ran. I tripped over a pew and slammed into the floor. Dazed, I looked back. A figure in tattered robes stood by the altar, hood shadowing its face, hand raised in a gesture that could have been a blessing or a curse. We didn't stop running until we were clear of the trees. Eric never talked about it again. 2 weeks later, the chapel burned. Firefighters found no trace of accelerants and no animals or people inside. Nothing else around it caught fire, just the church, burned clean to the ground. In the ashes, they found one object fully intact, the candle, standing upright on what remained of the altar, wick blackened but whole. The motel room that wasn't there. Last summer, driving home from a wedding in the mountains, I got caught in one of the worst storms I've ever seen. Sheets of rain blurred the road, and I was hours from home. I pulled off when I saw the glowing neon of a small roadside motel, Pine Rest Inn. It sat back from the highway, half hidden by tall grass and fog. I hadn't seen it before, and GPS didn't list it. It wasn't abandoned. The lights were on, and a man at the front desk wordlessly handed me a room key labeled Room 6. He didn't speak, didn't ask for ID, just stared at me like I'd already been expected. I was too tired to argue. The room was dated but spotless. Yellowed wallpaper, a floral bedspread, a rotary phone on the nightstand. No Wi-Fi. The TV only played static. I shrugged it off and lay down, exhausted. I don't know how long I slept before the knocking started. It was faint at first. A polite knock, like someone unsure if they had the right door. I checked the peephole. No one. Then it came again, louder, on the door next to mine. Then the next. Room to room, something was moving down the hall. I locked the deadbolt and backed away. That's when the phone rang. I hesitated, then picked up. At first, just static, then softly. Room 6 should be empty. My chest went tight. I grabbed my things and ran out. The hallway was dark and silent. At the front desk, there was no one. I tossed the key on the counter and fled to my car, soaked and shaking. The next morning, I returned with a friend out of sheer disbelief. Daylight made everything clearer, or should have. But there was no motel, just an overgrown lot, cracked pavement, and the faint remnants of a foundation. I thought I'd gone mad. But then we saw it, half buried in dirt and gravel. A rusted motel key with a worn tag. Room 6. I took it home. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. It sits in my desk drawer now. And every few weeks, on stormy nights, I hear soft knocking from the hallway. When I open the door, no one's there. But the key? It's sometimes warm to the touch. And once, I found it sitting on my windowsill, damp as if it had just come in from the rain. The hospital in the Pines. Everyone in town knew about St. Augustine's. It was built deep in the woods just after World War II, meant to be a state-of-the-art psychiatric hospital. But over the decades, it earned a reputation for cruelty, experimental treatments, locked wards, and patients who disappeared from the records entirely. After a fire in the East Wing and a slew of lawsuits, the facility was shuttered in the late 80s. By the time I was a teenager, the place had become a rite of passage. Sneak inside, spend the night, come back and brag. We didn't last the night. 3 of us went, me, Jess, and Tony. We got in through a basement window and set up camp in an old patient room on the 2nd floor. We brought snacks, flashlights, even a speaker to blast music and kill the mood. It was fine at first. Dusty, cold, but quiet. Then the music stopped. We checked the speaker, battery full. Tried to play it again, nothing. Then Jess's flashlight flickered. She smacked it, and it died completely. Tony's started strobing like a strobe light. That's when we heard the voice. I told you not to scream. It came from down the hall, male, calm. But we were alone. We froze, then heard the sound of metal scraping, like a gurney being wheeled slowly toward us. We bolted. I led, the others close behind. We turned left at the stairwell, but it wasn't there. Just a wall. We turned again, still no exit. The building had changed. Finally, we found a window and smashed it open. Jess climbed out first, cutting her hand on the glass. We helped Tony out, then I scrambled through. As my feet hit the ground, I looked back. A man in a patient gown stood just inside the broken window. He raised one hand and put his finger to his lips. Then he vanished. We never spoke about it after. Jess moved away. Tony stopped answering my messages. A month ago, I drove out to the site again, just to see it in daylight. But there's nothing there now, not even ruins. Just a flat patch of land, no trees, no walls. Like the building was never there at all. The storage unit. I got a storage unit a few years ago when I moved into a tiny apartment after my divorce. Nothing fancy, just a chain of red roll-up doors on the edge of town. I kept my old furniture, photo albums, boxes of my kids' toys, all the things I couldn't throw away. One night, I got a call from the storage facility's automated system. It said there had been activity in my unit. I went the next day, annoyed and half asleep, expecting a rodent problem or maybe someone had broken in. But my unit was locked. The manager said nothing showed on the cameras. I opened the door and everything looked untouched until I noticed the mirror. I didn't have a mirror. It was standing at the back of the unit, tall, antique, and framed in tarnished silver. I thought maybe I'd forgotten about it. Maybe it had belonged to my grandmother. But the longer I stared at it, the more wrong it felt. The reflection didn't match. I mean, it did, but only mostly. My movements lagged, just a fraction of a second. My smile was off. My reflection blinked when I didn't. I shut the unit and walked away. Told the manager I didn't want it anymore. He said I'd need to clear it out or pay the fee. I agreed, but never went back. 2 weeks later, I got a call. My unit had been auctioned off. A man bought the contents, took them home. He was found 3 days later in his garage, eyes wide open, heart stopped, no sign of trauma. Just the mirror, propped up in front of him. Police asked me about it. I told them the truth. I didn't know where it came from. But I still dream about it. And in those dreams, I see myself. Only it's not me. Not exactly. And it's getting closer. The motel under the bridge. There's an overpass just outside town that no one seems to maintain. The concrete is cracked, graffiti lines the support beams, and trash collects in the weeds below. But tucked behind the pillars is something stranger. A long abandoned roadside motel, almost completely obscured from view. It's not on any maps, and the entrance is hidden behind a patch of dead trees and a rusted sign so faded you can barely read, "Welcome." People say it was built for truckers in the 50s, then quietly shut down after a series of disappearances. Now it's just a ruin. I found it by accident while walking my dog. He stopped cold at the tree line, tail down, refusing to move. It's not like him. He's a shepherd mix, fearless around most things. So I tied him to a fence post, gave him a treat, and walked in alone, curiosity outweighing caution. The place looked like it had been sealed off decades ago. Shattered glass crunched under my boots as I walked through the parking lot. The front office was gutted, burn marks on the counter, phone cords frayed and dangling. Behind the counter, a metal key rack still hung on the wall, dusty but intact. Only one key was missing, room 104. I walked down the row of doors, and that's when things got strange. Every room I passed had a light seeping through the blinds. Some flickered blue, others red, one green. The rest of the building looked dead. No power lines, no sound of a generator. Room 104's door was wide open. Inside was pristine. Bed made, sheets tight. TV on with static. A rotary phone off the hook, its line trailing across the floor. It was too clean, like someone had just stepped out for a moment, or never left. The moment I stepped inside, the door slammed behind me, hard. The static on the TV grew louder until it was unbearable, like it was inside my skull. I tried the handle, locked. The room grew colder, the static now pulsing. On the screen, a hallway appeared, long and dimly lit. Not the room I was in, somewhere else. In the center of the screen, a figure appeared, walking slowly toward the camera. I turned around. No one. I looked back. The figure was closer, then closer again. No cuts, just jumps. No footsteps. The screen cracked. At that moment, the door burst open. I didn't look back. I ran through the lot, grabbed my dog, and drove off without even locking the car. I went back the next day with friends, all of us skeptical but willing to check it out. The motel was gone. No ruins, no sign, just weeds and empty gravel. Nothing but the faint impression of a foundation. That night, I found the key to room 104 in my coat pocket. I still have it. Every few months, it ends up in a different room of my house, even when I lock it away. The lighthouse with no light. Along the rocky shoreline 3 towns over, there's a lighthouse that's not on any registry. No lighthouse keeper, no maintenance, no path leading to it. You won't find it on any nautical charts either. The locals call it the Hollow Watcher. From a distance, it looks normal. Gray brick, tall and narrow, with a rusting dome-shaped top. But at night, no light ever shines. Even during the worst storms, it remains a silhouette in the rain, black against the sky. I sailed out to it once with a friend named Martin. We were both amateur photographers, chasing rumors of weird structures along the coast. We anchored about 20 meters offshore and rowed the rest of the way. The steps were slippery, covered in moss and seaweed, but we climbed them. The main entrance was wide open, rusted hinges groaning as we pushed through. Inside, it was completely hollow. No furniture, no internal walls, no signs anyone had ever lived there. Just a spiral staircase of corroded metal winding up to the top. It felt bigger than it looked from the outside, and colder. Every step echoed as if the space itself disapproved of us. At the top, there was no light mechanism, just a wide window facing the sea and an old wooden chair placed directly in front of it. Someone was sitting in the chair, unmoving, facing the ocean. Back turned to us. We called out. No answer. Martin walked up and put a hand on their shoulder. The figure collapsed forward. Empty clothes, no body, no bones. Just the impression of a person left behind. Then the wind outside died, completely. The ocean, previously choppy and loud, was still. The silence was total. We looked out the window, expecting to see waves. Instead, we saw land, an impossible stretch of pale soil and colorless grass reaching toward a horizon under a red sky. No sea, no clouds, just something else. It felt like we'd crossed into a painting that hated being seen. Panic set in. We raced down the stairs. The steps were longer now, like the tower had grown while we were inside. When we burst out, the water was back, but our boat was gone. Only the rowboat remained. We didn't ask questions. We paddled until we hit our sailboat, and as soon as we crossed the tide line, the sea resumed its waves, wind rushing in like it had been held back. The lighthouse, when we looked back, was gone. Just air and waves. We returned to that shoreline for weeks, scouring charts, old books, talking to locals. No one could prove it had ever been there. Martin stopped returning my calls after that. But on some nights, when the fog comes in thick and the wind dies, I see it again. A black column against the horizon. No light, but something watching. And in the silence, I can hear the creak of that chair, slowly turning toward the window. The elevator beneath the library. The old town library was scheduled for demolition last year. It had been closed since the early 2000s. Structural issues, they said. But I'd spent so many afternoons there as a kid that I had to see it one last time. I went during the week it was being gutted. The workers had left early due to weather, so I slipped through the chain-link fence and found a side door left open. The place was dark and smelled like mildew and wet paper. There were old posters still clinging to the walls in the children's section, and a bulletin board with curled flyers advertising events long past. I wandered toward the back, where the archives had been. That part had always been off limits, even when the library was open. There was a maintenance hallway I'd never seen before, leading to a wall with a strange steel panel. I brushed the dust away. It was an elevator, one that hadn't been there before. No buttons, just a single up arrow that flickered like it wasn't really on. I hesitated, listening to the silence, and then the door opened on its own. Inside, it was cleaner than the rest of the building, almost sterile. I stepped in. The moment the doors shut, the lights inside dimmed. No buttons appeared, just soft elevator music, warped like an old cassette. The air smelled like cold metal and something floral, like funeral flowers. After what felt like minutes, the doors opened. But I wasn't in the basement. It was a hallway, endless, lit by flickering fluorescents. Doors on each side, every few feet, none labeled. The walls were painted a dull green that pulsed slightly if I looked too long. I stepped out, and the elevator disappeared. Just gone. No trace. I walked down the hallway, trying to keep calm. Some of the doors were cracked open, but I didn't look inside. The sound of something dragging echoed faintly from far behind me. Then I heard breathing behind one of them. Slow, heavy, like someone sleeping very close to the edge. Another door creaked open ahead. A child's voice whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." I turned and saw a shadow move past a doorway. The dragging sound grew louder. I ran, picked a direction, and ran until the hallway changed, became narrower, the lights darker, tinged with red now. The floor felt soft, like carpet soaked in water. Finally, I found another elevator. Different from the first, older. It had buttons this time, but all were unmarked. I got in. It didn't move. Instead, a voice came through the speaker. "You'll forget this." The lights went out. When I came to, I was outside, lying in the parking lot. My phone was gone. My keys, too. I walked home in the rain, my head pounding. My shoes were wet, but I couldn't remember stepping in the water. The library was demolished 3 days later. There were no blueprints showing any elevator, no sublevels, no maintenance hallway, just floor plans that ended at the archive wall. But I still dream of the hallway. And in those dreams, the doors are opening, one by one. Sometimes I hear my name coming from one of them. The carnival lot. There's a vacant lot about 5 miles outside town. Just trees and dirt now. But it used to be a traveling carnival's seasonal stop. Every October, they'd pitch tents and rides and stay until Halloween night. But one year, they didn't leave. They vanished. Tents half-packed, food left out, even cars abandoned. No one knows what happened. People say the place is cursed, that the carnival was never meant to be there in the first place. Last fall, my cousin and I went to check it out. We found old debris, broken fencing, cracked boards, rusted ticket stubs. The grass had grown over most of it, but there were tire marks in the dirt that looked fresh. Just as we turned to leave, we heard music. Distant calliope music, barely audible over the wind. It was an old tune, something playful and hollow. We followed it. In the middle of the lot stood a carousel. Literature moving, its horses twisted and melted, as if part of a dream half forgotten. We stood frozen, and then it stopped, all at once. The music ended, and a voice called out from behind us. "The show is ready." We turned. A man in a carnival barker's coat and top hat stood there, eyes sunken, grin wide and wrong. His skin looked powdered, and he moved too smoothly, like he was gliding. He gestured to a tent we hadn't seen. It was striped black and red and pulsed like it was breathing. Against every instinct I had, we followed him inside. The tent opened into a maze of mirrors. But the reflections didn't match. They showed versions of us we didn't recognize, older, broken, some bleeding. One version of me had no eyes. In another, I was still in the tent, decades older, screaming silently. The mirrors made no sound, but our reflections did. Their mouths moved, silently mouthing things I couldn't understand. We ran, found an exit flap, and burst through into daylight, or what we thought was daylight. The lot was empty again. No carousel, no tent, no footprints. Just our car, parked where we'd left it. The sky looked too pale. The clouds didn't move. We drove in silence. I found a black and red ticket stub in my jacket pocket the next day. No writing, just a stamped date. Next October. I've already decided. I'm not going back. But sometimes, just before sleep, I hear that music. And I swear I smell popcorn and sawdust drifting through the window. Once, I saw a shadow moving just beyond my backyard fence, and I thought I heard the barker whisper, "One more show." The drive-in that never closed. On the edge of town, just past the industrial district, there's an old drive-in theater that's been shuttered for decades. Or at least, it's supposed to be. The sign out front is faded to white. The screen has holes punched through it by years of weather, and the concession stand's roof has caved in. But every once in a while, someone reports seeing lights there. Not just flashlights. Movie lights, a flickering glow on the screen, the sound of vintage music echoing faintly through the trees. I went to investigate one night out of morbid curiosity. My dad used to take me there as a kid before it closed down. I pulled in through the overgrown gravel entrance. The lot was empty, blanketed with weeds and broken glass. But as soon as I parked, the projector turned on by itself. The screen lit up with a grainy black and white film. It wasn't anything I recognized, just a long corridor and a woman walking down it over and over. No credits, no music, just the sound of her shoes. Then I noticed other cars, old cars, parked behind mine. I hadn't heard them pull in. Their headlights were off, but I could see silhouettes inside, still. Silent, I felt watched. I turned my key, ready to leave, but my engine wouldn't start. The radio came on instead, playing a staticky voice that whispered, "Stay and watch." I ran, left my car and ran through the trees. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. When I returned the next day with a tow truck, the lot was empty. No projector, no cars, no sign I'd ever been there, except my car, parked perfectly in the center with the keys still in the ignition. The tow driver said the place hadn't had power in years. He didn't question it, but he wouldn't make eye contact the whole ride back. That night, I found an old ticket stub on my pillow. The time stamped 1:06 a.m., the exact minute the screen lit up. The train station below the city. In the middle of downtown, beneath the financial district, there's an old subway tunnel that was decommissioned sometime in the 1960s. Most people think it was filled in, paved over, forgotten. But it's not. If you know the right alley, there's a hatch in the sidewalk. Underground access. Not locked, just heavy. Like someone doesn't want it opened, but isn't trying too hard to stop you. I found it after reading a thread on an Urban Explorer forum. It took me weeks to work up the nerve. When I finally went down, I brought a flashlight, extra batteries, a knife, just in case. The ladder descended at least 3 stories. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell changed from rust to something like formaldehyde. The tunnel looked like it had been preserved in time, cracked tile, broken signs, old ads for cigarettes and black and white movies. I walked for what felt like an hour. Then I saw it, a train, parked, silent, lights dimly glowing inside. The doors opened as I approached. Against better judgment, I got on. The lights inside were amber and soft. There were people in the seats, but they didn't move. I thought they were mannequins until I looked closer. They were breathing. Barely. Then the train lurched forward. It didn't follow any tracks. It turned when it shouldn't have. Climbed angles no train should be able to. The passengers began to whisper in unison. I couldn't make out words, just a sound, low and rhythmic. I pulled the emergency stop. Nothing happened. The windows now showed places that couldn't exist. Cities floating in black oceans, skies with 2 suns, streets looping back on themselves. Eventually, the train stopped. The doors opened. I stepped off into a station carved from stone. Symbols covered the walls, etched deep, glowing faintly. No signs, no exits. But there was another tunnel. I walked and walked. I woke up in my bed the next morning, covered in dirt and subway grime. My flashlight was beside me, battery dead. My phone had dozens of photos, blurry shots of the glowing symbols, the train's passengers, the tunnels. But the moment I tried to show someone, the photos disappeared. The hatch is still there, but now it's welded shut. I still hear train wheels in my dreams. And sometimes, when I pass through the city at night, I feel the ground hum beneath me, like something's still running down there. The Orchard of Names. There's a stretch of land just beyond the hills west of the county line. A forgotten orchard with rows of dying apple trees and soil that never quite dries. The property has no listed owner, no driveway, and no buildings. Just a rusted gate with a hand-painted sign that reads, "Speak kindly." Locals avoid it. Some say it's haunted. Others say it's cursed. No one harvests the fruit. No one dares. I found it during a hiking trip, my GPS cut out, and I wandered until I stumbled through a gap in the tree line and into the orchard. The trees were gnarled and bent, bark blackened like it had been burned, yet they still bore fruit. Small, pale apples that shimmered faintly even in the shade. Curious, I plucked one. My name was carved into it. I dropped it immediately. It landed without a sound. I looked around. Every apple on that tree bore a name. Some names I recognized from local obituaries, others from missing person reports, and some I didn't know at all. I walked to the next row, more names. The deeper I went, the older the trees, the darker the bark, the heavier the silence. Then I heard whispering, not from any direction, just all around me, like the wind was speaking through the leaves. I turned to leave, but couldn't find the gap I'd entered through. The rows twisted into each other, and the sky darkened unnaturally fast. Something was following me. I never saw it fully, just flickers between trunks, a shadow with limbs too long, too many joints. I ran until I reached a clearing. At its center was a tree much larger than the rest. Beneath it, a mound of earth freshly disturbed. There was a hole, just wide enough to fit a body, and beside it, another apple. My full name, my date of birth, and a date that hadn't come yet. I smashed the apple, filled the hole with rocks, and ran. I don't remember how I found the road. Just that I didn't stop running until I saw headlights. Sometimes I still find twigs in my laundry, bits of blackened bark in my shoes. I haven't told anyone my real birth date in years. The apartment above the pharmacy. There's an old pharmacy on 12th and Green. It's been closed for as long as I can remember. Boarded windows, sun-bleached signage, and a "for lease" notice that never changes. But the apartment above it? That's another story. Sometimes at night, people see lights flick on upstairs. Curtains twitch, shadows move past the windows. But the building's utilities were shut off in 1996. I was staying with a friend who lived nearby. One night, while we walked home from a bar, we saw the light. Just a dim glow, barely visible, but enough to make out a silhouette standing behind the curtain. My friend dared me to go check it out. I'd had just enough to drink to think it was a good idea. We pried the back door open. The pharmacy was just as you'd expect, dusty, silent, frozen in time. Prescription bottles still behind the counter, a blood pressure cuff still looped around a fake arm on a display. We found stairs in the back corner, narrow and steep. They creaked as we climbed. The apartment door was unlocked. Inside, the air was cold and dry. Furniture covered in sheets, picture frames turned face down. The light we'd seen? A single lamp in the corner, flickering. We stepped in, and the door slammed behind us. Hard. We tried to leave, but the knob wouldn't turn. Then we heard footsteps above us. But there was no floor above the apartment, just roof. The lights cut out, Total darkness. A voice whispered from somewhere close, "Don't answer the phone." Then the landline rang. I didn't pick it up. Neither did my friend. We just stood there, frozen, as it rang and rang and rang. Then it stopped. The door creaked open. We didn't wait. We bolted down the stairs and didn't stop until we hit the street. When we turned to look, the apartment window was dark again. A week later, I walked past the pharmacy alone. The light was back, and in the window was a figure, holding a phone to its ear, watching me. The ice rink beneath the mall. The old Rivergate Mall has been half empty for years. Most of the stores closed after the big anchor tenants pulled out. And now it's mostly a few sad kiosks, an abandoned food court, and teenagers loitering near shuttered storefronts. But when I was a kid, there was an ice rink in the basement. I remembered it clearly. Christmas decorations up year-round, an arcade next to the rental counter, and a slow, sour smell of popcorn and Zamboni fumes. But if you ask anyone now, they say there never was a rink, that it was just a rumor or a confused memory. I knew what I saw. So last winter, I went back. Not to the mall itself. It had mostly been converted to office space. But through a service door, I remembered behind the old department store. The keypads were still there, but broken. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, it was dark, but the air was cold, freezing cold. I followed a sloping corridor down, deeper than I thought the mall went. Then I found it. The rink was still there, or at least what was left of it. Ice covered the floor, dull and cracked, with skate marks etched deep into it, like someone had never stopped skating. The overhead lights flickered on as I stepped in. I heard music, an old waltz, warped and distant. The sound of skates gliding echoed softly. Then I saw the people, shapes in the mist, moving slowly around the rink. Dozens of them skating in a loop. I couldn't see their faces, just their dark clothing, their gliding feet. They didn't stop, didn't fall, didn't look up. I should have left, but I stepped onto the ice. It was bitterly cold, colder than outside. I didn't have skates, but I found myself sliding forward anyway. One of them turned their head slightly toward me. Their eyes were sunken. Their mouth hung open, not breathing, just wide and empty. Then another turned, and another. They were all looking at me. I ran. I fell. The ice cracked beneath me, but I managed to crawl to the edge. When I looked back, the figures had stopped skating. They were all standing still now, waiting. I made it back to the corridor and slammed the door shut behind me. The mall was demolished 6 months later. The basement was filled in with concrete. But every winter now, when I pass the site, I swear I can still hear the scrape of blades on ice. The bus stop at the end of town. There's a road that leads nowhere, just trees and power lines, and eventually a dead end at a chain-link fence. But at the very edge of town, before that fence, there's an old bus stop. No schedule, no sign, just a bench, a pole with faded paint, and a broken lamp overhead. People say it's always been there, even before the town expanded out that far. But no one remembers a bus ever stopping there. One night, after a fight with my girlfriend, I went out walking to clear my head. I ended up there, staring at the stop like it might offer some answer. It was just after midnight, and the air was heavy with fog. That's when I heard it, the hiss of hydraulic brakes. A bus pulled up, old, rusted, windows too dark to see through. The door creaked open. The driver didn't speak, just waited. I don't know why I got on. Maybe I was too tired to think. Maybe I wanted to leave more than I realized. Inside, it was warm, too warm. The lights flickered. The seats were full of people, silent, unmoving. Some looked asleep. Others stared straight ahead. I sat near the back. The driver pulled away. We drove. Not through town, not anywhere I recognized. The streets bent strangely. Buildings leaned at impossible angles. And the sky outside turned from black to red to deep green. I looked around. No one moved. One man near the front whispered something I couldn't hear. I leaned closer. He said, "You only get one ride." I panicked and pulled the stop cord. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. The driver kept going, faster now. The buildings became blurrier, like they were melting. I stood up and yelled. The bus screeched to a halt. The door opened. Just a blank, open field outside. I didn't think. I jumped out. I landed hard on my side. When I looked up, the bus was gone. No road, no headlights, just fog. Somehow, I made it back to town by morning. No idea how. But sometimes, late at night, I hear brakes outside my window. Just for a second, like something stopping, waiting. And I never walk that far out anymore. The house that smells like lavender. On the edge of the Blakely Preserve sits a crumbling house with peeling blue shutters and vines strangling the roofline. The local story is that it was abandoned in the 1950s after the couple who lived there died within days of each other. People say you can still smell lavender in the air when the wind shifts. A scent the wife was known for, always wearing it like a signature. One October afternoon, I hiked into the preserve and found the house without meaning to. It was half collapsed and swallowed by weeds, but the door was still on its hinges. The inside was quiet, layered in dust in the slow decay of time. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I smelled it. Strong, floral, lavender. I moved room to room. Furniture was still there. Chairs, tables, a piano with a single unbroken key. On the mantel I found an old photograph of the couple. Faces faded. The woman had sharp eyes and a smile that looked more like a warning. The scent grew stronger the longer I stayed. Upstairs the air grew stifling. A trail of lavender buds led to a bedroom with a warped four-poster bed and mirrors on every wall. I looked into one and saw movement. Behind me, just for a second. A figure in a dress, standing still. I turned. No one. I left in a rush, but the scent followed, clung to my clothes. For days, it didn't wash off. Even now, months later, sometimes I catch it again, sudden and sharp, and I remember those eyes in the photo. Watching. The tunnel beneath the playground. At the center of Mapleview Park, there's an old concrete tunnel that used to be part of a storm drain system. It runs beneath the playground and emerges into a shallow creek bed. Kids used to crawl through it until the city sealed off one end with a steel grate. But the other side, beneath the slide, remains open. As a kid, I remember crawling through it with my friends, daring each other to go just a little farther into the dark. But we never went far. Something about the air inside felt too still, too wrong. Last summer, on a nostalgic whim, I went back. The playground was empty and the sun was going down. I crouched at the mouth of the tunnel and looked inside. Cold air drifted out. It smelled like wet stone and iron. I climbed in, flashlight in hand. The walls were tagged with old graffiti and claw marks I couldn't explain. I kept going. About 50 feet in, I noticed the tunnel had turned slightly, like it curved underground in ways I hadn't remembered. Then I saw it. What looked like a door, embedded in the wall. Rusted shut, no handle. As I moved closer, I heard laughter behind me. Childlike, but wrong. Stretched, I turned and aimed my flashlight. Nothing. I turned back, and the door was open. Beyond it, stairs descending. The laughter echoed from below, I ran, crawled back out into the night air, lungs burning. The next morning, the tunnel was bricked shut, like it had never been opened. The city claims it was sealed years ago. But when I walk by, sometimes I hear something tapping from inside. Slow, deliberate, like someone waiting to be let out. The room behind the furnace. My uncle used to own an old brick building downtown that he rented out as office space. It had once been a printing press, then a tailor's shop, and finally a string of startups that never lasted more than a year. After he passed, I inherited the place and started clearing it out. The basement was the worst. Musty, low-ceilinged, filled with rusting equipment and soot-covered pipes. Near the far wall, behind the industrial furnace, I noticed something odd. A crack in the brick, just wide enough to suggest a seam. When I knocked, it sounded hollow. I cleared away boxes, and sure enough, there was a narrow door hidden in the brickwork. No handle, just a push latch. I opened it and found a narrow set of stairs spiraling down into the dark. The air grew colder the farther I descended. At the bottom was a small room, no more than 10 feet square. A single chair in the center. The walls were covered in writing, scratched in with something sharp. Not words, symbols, repeated over and over. In the corner sat an old reel-to-reel recorder, humming softly even though it wasn't plugged in. Then I heard a voice, "Sit down." It wasn't angry, just calm, almost pleading. I turned and ran, slammed the hidden door shut and bolted up the stairs. The next day, I had a contractor seal it with concrete. I never went back down there. A month later, I checked the security cameras. At 3:12 a.m. every night, the basement light flicks on, and the furnace hums even though it's no longer connected to power. The path through the cornfield. When I was 17, I worked part-time at a pumpkin patch on a farm outside town. Each fall, they'd open a corn maze for kids. It was small, meant to be fun, not scary. But one year, we found a new path. It hadn't been cut by us. It showed up overnight, straight, unnaturally clean. The corn bent away from it, like it had grown that way. I walked it on a dare from a co-worker. Just me, a flashlight, and my phone. It led deep into the field, farther than the maze was supposed to go. The stalks got taller, thicker. The air was dense, and soon the sounds of the farm were gone. No wind, no crickets, just silence. At the end of the path, I found a clearing, flattened earth, and in the center, a scarecrow, but wrong. Too tall, arms too long, no face, just burlap stitched with something red. It was tied to a crossbar that looked like it had grown from the ground itself. Then it moved. Not much. Just enough to shift, to tilt its head. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I hit the fence. When I looked back, the path was gone. Nothing but wall-to-wall corn. The next morning, the farmer plowed the maze. Said he didn't want it anymore. Said the crops were dying. Every fall since, no corn grows in that section. But sometimes, when the wind is right, people swear they hear footsteps in the dry leaves. And once, someone found a piece of burlap snagged on the edge of the fence. Still damp. The bridge no one crosses. There's an old metal bridge on County Road 7, the kind built with rusted girders and wooden planks that creak under every step. It's not listed on any current maps, and if you ask locals, most will either brush it off or pretend they don't know what you're talking about. But everyone knows the truth. People go missing there. The road curves sharply just before the bridge, shielded by trees. I found it by accident while taking a detour home during a thunderstorm. I stopped when I saw the barricades, half-rotted wood and faded warning tape. But something made me get out and look. I crossed the barrier and walked to the bridge. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no rain hitting the leaves, just the groaning of the structure in the wind. At the center of the bridge, the air grew cold. I turned to go back and realized I wasn't alone. Someone was standing at the far end, pale, barefoot, their head tilted slightly like they were trying to remember my face. They didn't move, but when I blinked, they were closer. I turned and ran. I came back the next day with a friend, but the bridge was gone. No river, no span, just dense trees and a hollow space where the air still felt cold. We found my footprints, but only going in, none coming back. Sometimes, when I drive past that stretch of road, I see the figure again, standing just at the edge of the trees, waiting. The stairwell behind the high school. Back behind the old gymnasium of my high school, there's a stairwell most people forgot. It leads down, not up, and was supposedly sealed off after renovations in the 90s. We all heard stories, how someone disappeared down there during a fire drill, or how, if you knocked 3 times, you'd hear the knock come back from much farther below. During senior year, a few of us dared each other to go down. The door wasn't locked, rusted, but it opened with a shove. The stairwell was narrow and damp, lit only by our phone flashlights. The first flight led to a small landing, then another flight, then another. We descended for what felt like 15 minutes, passing floor after floor of crumbling brick and empty rooms. Every few landings, we'd find something left behind. A child's shoe, a cracked mirror, once even a school desk with a notebook still on it. The handwriting was frantic, as if someone had tried to finish a sentence before being pulled away. At the 13th landing, we heard footsteps above us. Heavy, deliberate, coming fast. We froze. Then a door slammed somewhere below, echoing up the stairwell. We ran. But the stairs didn't end. The higher we climbed, the darker it got. We started seeing our own graffiti from earlier landings, now fresh again. The same crumpled notebook, the same cracked mirror. We were looping. Eventually, we burst out into the sunlight, but not behind the gym. We were in the woods, miles from town. It was dark out. We never spoke of it again. But one of us, Mark, never really came back. He's quieter now, won't go near stairs. And once, in the middle of class, he wrote something on the whiteboard without realizing it. Just 3 words. Still down there.